Hey Reddit, what's the strangest coincidence you've ever personally experienced? My old work ran a secret Santa once the week before Christmas. It was a $10 limit and the person I was buying for I didn't know very well. I left my buying to the last minute because I just didn't know what to get her. So I was in town and walking past some shops when lo and behold, I see an old copy of Oliver Twist in the window of the second-hand bookstore. It just called to me, so I went in and picked it up. I checked the first page for the cost and guess what? $10, perfect. So come the day of the Secret Santa, we were all opening our gifts, some 150 people. Out of the corner of my eye I see some people crowding around a woman who is crying. I keep listening and people are calling out for the person who was her Santa. I go over and reveal that it was me. The lady I had bought for was crying and hugged me. She said 10 years ago her house burned down along with all her possessions. The book that I bought her was her favorite and also the exact same edition, so had the exact same cover she remembered. Because it was a second-hand book it was even weathered in the same places she remembered, so it was as if I'd grabbed the book off her shelf before the fire and delivered it to her 10 years later. Here in my little town in northwest England there's a good kebab shop from which the lads and I have ordered for years. We've been in there after countless nights out and had them deliver to our doors, so we know the guys who work there pretty well. They're mostly Turkish. Once a few of us got together for a short break in Turkey. Having got off the plane, we waited in the car park outside for another pal who'd been on a different flight. As we stood, soaking in the ambience of a new country, none other than the tall guy from our local kebab shop walked across the road right in front of us, 2,000 miles from home. That was weird. He was an undercover Turkish agent who was also good at kebabbing. Seeing Paul McCartney, the Beatles, on TV in 2001, and noticing he was tall. Next day I'm walking down a very quiet street, and walking towards me is a really tall guy, and it was Paul McCartney. He must have seen my expression so he veered my way, stuck his hand out and said hi mate. I was shocked. 18 years later I'm still shocked lol. Edit I'm 6 feet 1. Turns out he's 5 feet 11 inches. Maybe he was just lanky. He certainly appeared tall to me. I should also add that he didn't just stick his hand out, I meant to say he shook my hand. Crazy. He then briskly walked away. A very brief encounter but a really important one for me. I also wouldn't blame anyone for not believing me. It's a weird story. Apparently he's quite friendly like that. One of my dad's bus driver colleagues said a car pulled up beside him at traffic lights with McCartney in the passenger seat. It was summer, windows were open and Paul just leaned out the window, casually said hello and asked, "What's it like being a bus driver?" The guy claims to have replied, "It's a long and winding road, Paul." I bet he thought of that in the shower the next day. Nobody believes me when I tell this story, but one day my husband and I ran into the same couple at 3 different places, in 2 different states. So my husband and I had an errand to run out of state. We leave early and stop to get breakfast. The couple was sitting across from us. The lady had on a funky shirt, which is why she stuck out in my mind. After breakfast we drive the next state over to the office we have an appointment at. We're waiting in the lobby and the couple from the breakfast joint walks in. Weird. So we spend the day finishing up our errands and then we drive back home. I didn't feel like cooking so we stopped to get some dinner at the pub. We sit down at the table and guess who's already eating at the table behind us? The same friggin' couple. My partner and I ran into this Japanese mother and son traveling through Southeast Asia. We ran into them in Siem Reap at the Angkor Wat temples, then again in town that night. We left 2 days later to fly to Ho Chi Minh City and they were on the same flight. We politely nodded and smiled. We landed in HCMC and went our separate ways. We went to our hotel, they went to theirs. After dinner on the second night we decided to go to a rooftop bar for a drink. We walked in and they were there. We all laughed and waved. Up to this point we hadn't actually spoken to each other. But we decided to sit down and chat to them for a short while. We didn't actually discuss the rest of our travel plans beyond our departure dates from Vietnam. A few days later we're leaving our hotel to go back to the airport. A shuttle bus picks us up and the Japanese mother and son are on the bus. Turns out the 2 hotels shared a shuttle service to the airport. We didn't know where they were flying to, but turns out they were also flying to Nha Trang and were seated in the row opposite us. We get to Nha Trang and decided to share a taxi into the city. We were staying at the same hotel. By this point it was beyond ridiculous that our paths were crossing this much. So we just accepted it. And decided to hang out with them that night. Have dinner. And go out for drinks. We get to chatting about our lives. I grew up in a small rural town in Australia. About 18 years earlier we had a Japanese exchange student live with us for about 3 months. Turns out this Japanese exchange student was the brother of the woman sitting across from us. It was mind-blowing. After all the weird path crossing we had already encountered over the last 10 days, this was just the cherry on top. I went back to the hotel that night and sent my mum a Facebook message to send me a photo of the Japanese exchange student. She dug through our old family photos and found one of him and I was 10 or 11 at the time. The next night we had dinner with them again and I show the mother the photo. She started laughing because it was her brother, and she thought I had been making a joke the night before. Crazy times. I was in St. Augustine on vacation. On the way there I just happened to think about this girl I knew back in college in Orlando. Just sorta wondered what she was up to and the like. Sure as shit I ran into her in a bar there the first night. She was there celebrating graduating from PA school. Similar thing happened to me. I dated this guy Steven when I was in my late 20s and we lived together for a year and then we broke up. And I was devastated. It had been about 3 or 4 maybe even 5 years since I'd seen him when I was walking in Santa Monica with my best friend and I said to her, "You know what's weird? Steven have so many friends in common and I have never seen him in this whole time since we broke up." 5 minutes after that we walked across the street and walked into a restaurant and who is sitting there but Steven. Me and a friend took some acid one night and were tripping hard. Decided to walk to a gas station and get some smokes or something. We walked by a car lot in the small town I'm from and all of the cars in the lot were cop cars. We were both walking ramrod straight all the way to the store, very quietly bought whatever we went there for and took a back street back to his place. We just stared at each other for like an hour and didn't speak after we got there. Turns out the city had bought a whole new fleet of cop cars and they had all been delivered there and were on the lot for just that night. Too funny. Reminds me of a time in my rebellious youth, 20 plus years ago, when friends and I found ourselves in a similar state to what you mention. Around 7 a.m. as the sun is rising we are feeling good and decide that a friendly game of frisbee down the street at the park would be a good time. We stroll down to the park and the light is so beautiful and the air feels so good. We get in a good throwing zone of 5 of us and we are heating it up with the frisbee and hooting and hollering as we were the only people there, until we weren't. All of a sudden there were about 40 police officers in full SWAT gear that showed up. Turns out they had a planned SWAT exercise at the park we just so happened to be buzzing our faces off at while throwing the frisbee. Once it registered we split quick. In grade 10 English class, the teacher didn't have anything planned for us to do and it was close to the end of the year I guess. So she goes to the big cupo board in the corner and pulls out a stack of copies. It's examples of a successful essay written during a final exam, so we can learn what a good one looks like and how to build a narrative, etc. The topic of these was what was the most pivotal moment of your life? There's 3 examples, ranging in proficiency. We read through the first 2, and I volunteer to read the last one aloud. I start reading, and I stop. The essay was about me. My big sister had gotten a really good mark 6 years earlier on her final exam essay which she wrote about the day I was born. I got pretty emotional about that one. I like the idea that you just get all emotional and stuff while reading and everyone thought that it was like, the best story ever. Like, wow, we need to do something like that. But that's awesome. When I was born my mother told me my brother slapped me when he first saw me. That always gave me the edge on, he started it, so when he refers to something like a week ago, I can be like, yeah well, when I was first born you hit me. Worked half day. Drove 6 hours from Southern California to Northern California for car camping with my wife. Chose obscure campground which was neatly deserted, off-season. Picked the most deserted and remote campsite location, we planned on rockin' the tent. Were bummed after setting camp and another couple selects site right next to us. Turns out to be a co-worker I'd spoken with earlier that day. Edit, I hadn't told coworker anything about plans. We weren't close. Earlier that day we spoke briefly of work-related issue.